I'm Dr Cath Watson, and today PD Insurance has asked me to talk to you about why vaccinations are important. So first up, I think we need to talk about what a vaccine actually is. So in most cases, a vaccine is made from something that causes a disease. So most of the time it's going to be a virus, sometimes it's bacteria, sometimes it's not something living at all. It can be something like pollens that cause allergies. So what happens? Usually that vector, so I'm going to mostly refer to viruses because that's most of the vaccines that we're talking about. So that virus is taken and either in its entirety or a section of it may be used, and then it's attenuated. So what that means is that that virus can no longer cause disease. However, it's still recognisable to the immune system, so that if it's given, the immune system's going to create a reaction to it. Now, sometimes that reaction to the vaccine is going to mean that next time your immune system meets it, there is no chance of that disease coming in at all, so it's going to be a preventative vaccine. Sometimes, however, it's just going to reduce the risk, so it means that the immune system is going to be able to recognise that vector when it comes in, but not necessarily completely prevent disease, but it's going to prevent that disease turning really nasty and potentially becoming life-threatening. So what happens with vaccines is that normally we give a series of vaccines when an animal is young. And the reason for this is because most kittens and puppies, after they're born, are going to drink mum's colostrum and milk. And what comes through that colostrum in particular are antibodies that help prevent against disease. So this is going to be the diseases that the mother has either already experienced or has been vaccinated against because she's produced antibodies against them. Those maternal antibodies then get passed on to the puppies and kittens and help their immune systems function while they're still really immature. Over time, those maternal antibodies are going to run out. But the problem is, for each individual, we don't know exactly when those antibodies run out. For some animals, it's going to be quite young. So by 6 weeks of age, potentially there's no maternal antibodies left, and therefore that puppy or kitten no longer has any protection at all. For others, it's going to be out more like 12 weeks of age, maybe even 14 weeks of age, before those maternal antibodies are no longer present. But up until that time, if you give them a vaccine while those maternal antibodies are still there, the immune system's not going to react to the vaccine because the antibodies are going to mop it up. So what happens is we end up giving a series of vaccines while they're young, and what we're trying to do is capture that window where the maternal antibodies are running out and the immune system can start to react. So by the time they have their last vaccine, ideally at 14 to 16 weeks of age, they're no longer going to have maternal antibodies in place, and their immune system's going to be mature enough to react and create their own antibodies and then protect them ongoing. As adults, we usually give them boosters periodically, and depending on the vaccine, that might be annually. In some cases, it might be every 3 years. In some cases, it may even be for life. If that's the case, it's because we're expecting their immune systems to have a reminder periodically and make sure that they can respond to disease in future if they happen to come across it. And the reason we do this is because the diseases that we're vaccinating against are usually pretty nasty. So if we're talking about dogs, we're talking about things like parvovirus would be the really common one around New Zealand. This virus tends to attack, in particular, the intestinal system, so you'll end up with horrendous vomiting and diarrhea. And depending on the age and the immune system vulnerability of that particular patient, it can be fatal and is fatal in up to 50% of animals. Yes, we have treatments, but prevention's way better. And if you've ever seen a puppy with parvovirus, you'll know what I mean. It is an awful way to exist because it's really not living. It is just horrendous. And like I say, when you've got a 50% chance of dying, why wouldn't you use a vaccine? The diseases that we tend to strongly recommend people vaccinate for are what we would call the core vaccines. So the main diseases that we're trying to prevent in dogs are things like distemper, hepatitis and parvovirus, and in cats we're mostly trying to prevent panleukopaenia. There are some other diseases which the vaccines, like I say, are not quite so good at preventing disease, but are going to help reduce the risk of further of nasty disease. So these in particular would be things like canine cough in dogs and the cat flu viruses in cats. It's pretty unlikely we're going to be able to completely prevent these with canine cough, particularly because there's lots of different of vectors that can cause disease, and we're going to try and protect against the most severe ones that can cause pneumonia and potentially death. For cats, the cat flu viruses tend to be pretty ubiquitous, so they're everywhere in the environment. Most cats will have been exposed at some point very early in their life. So what the vaccine is aiming to do is prevent them getting really sick as they're older, and try and make sure that if they do end up unwell, that they don't need any particular treatment and that it's all going to be over pretty quickly. So when it comes to vaccines, we talk about core vaccines versus elective vaccines. So your core vaccines are against those particularly nasty diseases. So in dogs, distemper, hepatitis and parvovirus. In cats, it's particularly against panleukopaenia and usually the flu viruses because they are so common. There are some elective vaccines as well. So canine cough tends to come under elective, even though the vast majority of dogs in New Zealand we would strongly recommend do get vaccinated. And that's because if you've got a dog that's never going to go anywhere, never going to meet any other dogs, not going to kennels, not going to dog shows, not going to dog parks, very unlikely to ever meet another dog. Probably not a lot of those out there, but those dogs probably don't need the canine cough vaccine. With leptospirosis in dogs, again, there are certain geographical areas of New Zealand that seem to be higher risk, so that vaccine may be recommended for you in the area that you live in. So that's a really important thing to understand, is what is actually the risk in your area, and that you need to talk to your vet about that. They're going to have a pretty good idea of what the common diseases are where you live and what the risks are, what you should be particularly concerned about trying to prevent. The other thing to understand about vaccines is because they are aiming to prevent disease or at least make the disease a lot less severe, if you've got pet insurance and you choose not to use a vaccine for your puppy or kitten or adult dog or adult cat, then you need to understand that any pet insurance you have is not going to cover treatment for a disease that's preventable unless the vaccines are up to date.